Now, we also want to highlight our special guest speaker at this point on the screen, if we can, please. And we want to now move on to our featured speaker of the week, Peter Weitzner. Now, Peter is currently a journalism professor at Chapman University. He's had a storied career. We're really lucky to have him talk today. And we have Lexi to thank us for that.
Yes, thank you.
He started his professional life, can you believe this, as an internal auditor at J&J. And I think I actually heard him speak earlier, and he explained kind of how he made that transition. J&J is that big pharmaceutical company based in New Jersey. And I recently actually had a chance to hear him speak, and just fascinating speaker about business communications. It's just really an incredible life story, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And Peter has years of journalism and broadcasting experience after graduating from Rutgers College, as did our very own colleague, Peter Sherman, who's also a Rutgers grad. Go Scarlet Knights.
Whoever knew they were Scarlet Knights. Okay.
Right.
The role of a sports broadcaster is to provide live commentary analysis, reporting on sporting events, to engage and inform the audience. And I think just to make the entire thing, not just informative, but really dynamic and exciting, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, sounds like our role here at the town hall, AJ. And we have Lexi, who is
well, that's what we strive for.
That's right. But Lexi's usually behind the scenes and not in front of the camera.
Right.
But today she's here with us to in the studio to conduct the interviews. And Peter is one of Lexi's professors at Chapman University. So let's turn the microphones over to Lexi and Peter.
Yeah. Yes, awesome. Thank you so much. So I met Pete at Chapman for many of my broadcasting classes. He's like one of the most important teachers in the entire program. And as Ajay and Jacque mentioned, he's had an incredible career before arriving at Chapman. So thank you, Pete, for joining us.
My honor.
We appreciate you coming. I know that after moving into broadcasting, Pete, you conducted thousands of celebrity interviews, including talking with 3 U.S. presidents. Pete has served as the editor of the OC Business Journal, head of the Chapman Broadcasting Program, and now as a special consultant to the Chalk Children's Foundation. Without further ado, welcome. We are so happy to have you at SMA's Town Hall. And if you're ready, we can just jump in with a few questions we have for you.
Absolutely. Can I ask you a quick question? Forgive me, I'm a journalist, so of course I'll ask.
Go for it.
Well, you mentioned Johnson & Johnson, so it got me to thinking my first job, and Johnson & Johnson, the only company that they used to have these Dale Carnegie courses, workshops, that'll date me, maybe a few people, that were for professional development. And seeing that art presentation, which I thought was terrific, by Sarah, and I'm wondering, there's art involved in everything. You have a lot of defense work. Is that related to what SMA does, or is that purely for the enrichment of your people?
Yeah, I'll tell you a very, very short story, which is probably actually truly a long story. Right. But right after we got orders from the OC public health officer to go home, right? We all remember that day probably. Yeah. We were actually enjoying a St. Patty's Day luncheon. I had actually brewed a special beer for that. Right. And we were all kind of, yeah, that's right. We had actually kind of all said, okay, it's time to go home. We got to figure this out. That night, Jacque and I spoke, and we said, look, we got to do something for our people. We don't know if this is 1 week, it's probably going to be months, right? Yep. So over next couple of weeks, we figured out we need to not just stay connected, but we needed to entertain as the only way to keep people from being so isolated. So we started calling a whole bunch of, look, we're in SoCal, right? So we called a whole bunch of agents and got tennis pros, got to teach us how to play tennis virtually, magicians, comedians. We still have a comedian with us. He's wonderful. I could not get
dancers, golf pros.
Yeah, right? Just you name it, a sign language, a whole bit, Broadway singer, dancer. Anyway, I could not get a art historian to speak to us. I felt art's always something that's kind of common to everybody. Could not get one. So we finally were able to secure one. That was Sarah. And she started, and it is literally the most popular segment of our town halls. I think it's literally, they don't want to come watch us. They want to hear Sarah talk about art.
Exactly. Well, that's how you build or grow a culture.
Yeah,
things like that.
Definitely.
Sorry, Lexi, back to you.
No, you're good. That is awesome. So to start off, I know that you've had a very incredible career as a reporter in the beginning, especially. So how did you locate and contact people for stories, and what's the process of that?
Yeah, it's the most popular question you ever get, from viewers, readers, where do you find your stories? 80, 90% of the time, the story you're gonna do, right? If you're God, if you're in Washington, well, there's a million stories. If you're in Washington today, there's, you're doing a story on this debt limit, right? This debt limit. But it's the others, what we call enterprise stories, right? The 10 to 15% that maybe the competition doesn't have, maybe the public, and that's where you earn your spurs as a journalist, right? And you get that, and there's if you will, it's even a decent segue or a metaphor to COVID, and now this situation where I saw a headline the other day, the return to work has stalled. You get those stories by showing up, by being at events. And we used to say you go out to cover one story, you come back with 5, right? But based on meeting people and being curious and talking them up. And so I guess that's my, the general answer to your question is, back in the day, I always had a little notepad. Now it's my notes on my phone. These are potential stories.
Sounds like curiosity plays a really important part in that.
Yeah, sure does.
If you don't have my first professor at Northwestern, 1987, Father Robert McClory, said he went through this whole thing in the first few minutes. He goes, so let me tell you whether you should be here or not before you cut that first big tuition check. He goes, are you a naturally curious person? Are you the kind of person you're sitting in your friend's living room, they leave to go to the bathroom, their mail is piled up on the coffee table next to you. You start to sift through their mail and say, let me see who writes to this person. That's those are the kinds of things that's kind of shady, but
that's great.
Do you go down the rabbit holes? All right, right? Are you curious, or do you just I think those are probably that trait maybe served me well, I guess, in the business.
Gotta be curious.
Speaking of getting all of those incredible people that you interviewed all those times, what was it like to interview 3 presidents?
They were all unique. Sometimes it's controlled, but another thing I've always found, and I'll give you another example, what's in present was Clarence Thomas, who dedicated Chapman's law school. And at the time, he was only a few years out from being confirmed. The Anita Hill thing was fresh still in people's minds, and he was not giving interviews. And we were told, and this is at Chapman, and my students were shooting the event, and he was there all day. We were told no press availability, don't even try. But I had a couple of students and myself, we were there the whole day, and given the opportunity, would smile at him, shake his hand, thanks for coming to our school. And we had a camera, and he goes, what's the camera back there? Do you want an interview? And we're like, well, we were told. He goes, bring the camera up. And I think to this day, it's one of the only, I'm sure, one-on-one, think about it, one-on-one interviews with Clarence Thomas, right, that anyone has ever done. And it was terrific. He wanted to be a journalist, and he talked about that. Clinton, of course, is, as everyone will tell you, was as advertised. Look, you're the only person in the room. Just gives you this, spot-on answer. Actually, I'd add a fourth. One of the last interviews with Nixon I also had, besides both Bush Senior and Junior. And Nixon also was last thing on president. So Nixon gave a speech just a couple of months before he died. Pat passed away, and they always said as soon as his wife passed, he wouldn't be longer. And in between, he gave a speech, which was classic Nixon, 45 minutes, no notes, about foreign policy. And it was tough to get an interview with. He kind of favored all the big media, but it did have one. And it was that was a little more intimidating.
Yeah, definitely. That's incredible that you got those opportunities, though. And I know that you also were the editor of the OC Business Journal. So how do you effectively convey messages in that position?
That's a great question. So at the Journal, we tried to pride ourselves. I did that for a year and a half. So it's like a 30-person newsroom. And it's, I always would say it pitches much higher than a regional business publication. Somewhat because Orange County is, and you guys, I'm sure you know this in your business, we're kind of media starved. We always have been media slighted, if you will. The TV stations, the major register's not what it was. So we were very important, I thought, for the business community. But we always prided ourselves on writing business stories that were accessible. You're writing about complex, especially these days, more so all the time, right? But we wanted to write in a somewhat lighter, more accessible, that it wouldn't just be the C-suite, right? That was, or the people who were actively involved. Yeah, I need to know about that company because I want to sell to them, or that's my company. So, and storytelling, Alexa, you hit it. That's the biggest. You have to have that curiosity. And then as far as content, you have to know how to tell a story, right? You're going to have the greatest story in the world, but if you bury the lead and you don't have good energy. And so, and it's so, then the endless debate. Is everyone have it in them? Can everyone be a good writer? Can everyone be a good storyteller? And there was a great line. I had a colleague at Chapman. He wrote Kiss of the Spider Woman. His name, the late Leonard Schrader. And he said, I think everyone's a great writer, but in some people, it just has to be awakened. So as a manager, or if you have the professor, Lexi, that's like your job, is that all 25 or whatever, you're all going to can be good journalists. I don't have to worry about you at all. Like, I don't want to ruin you, but this one over here, who shows up 20 minutes late and his eyes are I might have to awaken it.
Yeah, I know for me, writing actually came to leaves naturally because I just prefer the more technical side. But I definitely learned a lot at Chapman. And speaking of your business experience at the Journal, would you comment on your award-winning documentary, When Money Talks, the story of OC bankruptcy?
I did a couple real quick. There's a good lesson in here. So Orange County, I think some of the people on this Zoom, if they've certainly been here in the 90s, we're the biggest municipal bankruptcy in history before. I think Detroit supplanted us. I think out of the Great Recession, Detroit filed a $3 billion. We were about $2 billion. Here's where having a business background and being a business journalist paid off. Huge story, affects every single person in Orange County. From will my trash get picked up to will be able to keep the inmates in the jail, right? And every single one of my colleagues ran away from it, only because it was a super complicated story. And on top of that, who wants to do a business story? That's most journalists. I hate to say, of course, there's ones at Fortune and CNN and Fox, CNBC, but those are the exception. Most journalists almost became journalists because of an aversion to balancing a checkbook. And so, but I knew that, and I actually worked in bankruptcy. And so I knew about inverse floaters and derivatives. And so I put my hand up, and it developed into a live nightly show for a few months until Orange County figured out how to get out of it. And then we made, 10 years later, I got asked, let's make a documentary about it. People in the town would say, well, when are you going to make the movie about it? But I always say, it didn't have any sex, and it didn't have thankfully, any murder to it, but it had everything else. But so we made on a 10-year anniversary, and still to this day, I'll occasionally send it to someone, and you look back, it was an amazing story how all these people, that this one guy behind the metal desk, the late Bob Citron, was able to take all the county money, all the sanitation district money, water district money, school district, some from all over the country, and basically bring it all to the casino and push it all in, and no one said anything. Right?
Wow.
So we named it When Money Talks, the Truth is Silent.
Yeah, wow. That is very
incredible.
intense. That is incredible, yes.
It was a big event back in the day. I mean, it was in the paper all the time.
It was leading the Wall Street Journal. Many people think that right at that time, so the end of 94, Alan Greenspan, and one of the things that led to this, they'd been raising interest rates, and they think he put the brakes on raising rates. There was a Mexican peso crisis and the Orange County bankruptcy, and there was a concern it wasn't just Orange County. There are a lot of other municipalities doing the same thing. You're supposed to take that widow and orphan money and put it in the most conservative investments. And this Citron and others were doing just the opposite. And Wall Street, they get their hooks into. So it was super interesting. Absent sex and murder.
Yes, that's such an important story to cover as well. So I'm very glad that you got the opportunity to cover that. And I know that now, well, obviously, you're working at Chapman, and I was wondering, what was it like transitioning from that professional world of reporting and working at the Journal and all that over to academia and taking over the Chapman Broadcasting Program?
Right. So I actually did Chapman. I ran that program for 20 years and then left to go to the Journal. And then, I always kept the class. So first leaving, I'm in my late 30s, and had the bankruptcy stuff, and you always need one or two hits to put yourself on the radar. And actually, that was, I'd say, a mistake. I started teaching too soon. I lucked out because it was Chapman, and as I think a lot of people know, Chapman has had this great boom led by the film and TV school, but other great business school and whatnot. And I caught that, and that was wonderful. And students like you, Lexi, it's so affirming. It's great to watching a Milwaukee Brewer Dodger game the other night, and both announcers were only in their early 30s, or my students.
Wow.
So I did that because I got an offer, and it was just one of those. I was going to take a little break from TV. I don't want to say I have any regret. You always used to say of Ted Kennedy, someone said, "Does he mind not being president?" And the response was, "He doesn't mind not being president. He just minds that somebody else is." So I had some regret. I took the easy. It's hard. It's hard to. You hit a certain point, then it gets very competitive, and I got comfortable here in Orange County, which is easy to do. So I left to get back into it because it was then or never, right? I'm going to go to the Business Journal, and maybe then I could go to, say, wherever, Fox Business or CNBC or, but it's a great teaching Chapman is a great career, and I think now is a critical time too for journalism, because let's face it, the fourth estate is not held in the highest esteem.
True.
Right.
And in the program, I know that you teach us like how to capture the audience's attention. So do you have like one piece of advice for anyone here who might want to capture someone's attention on what they can do?
Great question.
Yes. Concise, clear, and conversational. Write out your script, cut your story, and then cut it down. Keep all the good parts. It's always been a good way to tell stories. But in this day and age where everyone is, who even focuses on one thing, period, right? We read books with our phone in our hand. So you grab them early. And you're always wanting to tell them, why this is important and what's in it for you. If you can stick to that in almost every story, I think you can get and then of course, on the personal level as a storyteller, be yourself. Don't try to be someone that look like they're the new thing. Be yourself. Viewers, they know authenticity. They want that.
That's great advice. It's the same advice that it's something that we excel at in a part of our business where we write proposals for our clients for these very, very big, expensive things. Conciseness, authenticity, be very clear. Instead of we can't be conversational in our proposals, but we do pay attention to sentence structure, so that's easily understood and digested. But authenticity, and we focus on art, but authenticity I think is particularly important. You can't be somebody who you're not.
Right.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Exactly. As they say, once you can fake that, then you can do it.
And now, Pete, you're working with Jacque as well. And can you explain some of the contributions you have to that program?
So that's I recommend. It's just kind of like sales. I'd recommend that to anybody once in your life. It's hard. I mean, what a great brand, right? It's Orange County Children's Hospital, but my job is essentially to. I'm an assistant to their main director of development, but it's essentially to try and be a rainmaker, right?
Yeah.
For what could be a greater cause than boy or girl with pediatric AIDS, or so that's one where I'd say the takeaway is you never give up. You just keep, there's prospects you think, and they don't pan out, and then they stop returning your call, and like, all right, I get it.
Definitely.
And then hopefully one day you call someone and they've got a connection in some way, you get them over to the hospital. But That's one, my boss, Doug Corbin, is a great guy. He used to say, what you don't, we always highlight, here's the, the big gifts of the year, 10 million from this, 20 million, but what you don't see is the heavy lifting. And that's bringing them to the hospital. And so it couldn't be, actually I hoped it would be easier. And I hoped after 30 years of all these contacts that I had, but there's a fair amount of luck involved.
Yeah, I actually am an intern at Jacque as well at Seacrest Studios, and I know that everyone who works there works for such a great cause, and it's like an amazing team to be a part of.
Great culture. Yeah, they're one of the best brands in Orange County. It's a younger children's hospital. It's not like, this always bothered me. Like Jacque LA has been around forever.
Yeah.
And all these celebrities go on these shows. And, I'm donating everything to Jacque LA. What? Jacque Orange County could. So it's a young children's hospital. They got a lot of growth potential, and it's really a great institution.
Overall, such an impressive career. We're so thankful that you were here with us today. I just want to ask you one more question about if you have any other experiences or lessons that you've learned that you think could help our audience leave a long-lasting impression when they're communicating with people.
That's a great question. We're just getting back into that realm, right, where things are getting back to normal. And we're communicating in person. God, this will sound, I don't want it to sound too not heavy-handed, but among the lessons of communication are to listen more than you talk.
Yeah, that's great.
100%.
That's great.
Most of us are very, are somewhat insecure at our core, right? And we're thinking about, and it's so easy to have a conversation, listening and then ask, but if you listen to what other people say, you'll come away from that engagement and from anything in life, I think, a lot more enriched than, because otherwise you come out like, I remember what I said, but I have not. So,
good
definitely.
advice.
Thank you so much, Professor Pete, for joining us today. I think that's all the time we have. But
Lexi, thank you, and thanks to your company very much for the invitation.
Well, hold on. I think we would love to ask you to come back, because I know you have a lot more life stories and things to help us. Actually, I think a lot of things that you just talked about will help us and our employees and our business. And I know there's one special story which I heard you recently convey, which we'll ask you to on the second time you're back.
That wouldn't be when the champ put one to my jaw, would it?
Yes, yes. We'll save that for the next time you're back, Pete. And it's so wonderful to have you here. Such a fascinating career and so great advice for us. So thank you, Pete and Lexi.
Yes,
thank you so much for arranging this.
Happen. Yeah.
Exciting stories, great information, and what can be better, right?
Exactly.
Indeed. Thanks, so Pete.
My pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.